Thank you for having me. So I know that I saw this morning when I was doing the tours, and it was really lovely to speak to some of you earlier. So there will be a little bit of repetition for people who were on the tours this morning. So my role is that I am project managing the Historic England research that's been undertaken in Prairie Gardens as part of the High Street Heritage Action Zone project. My colleague Neil will be speaking after me, and he'll be particularly speaking about the ground penetrating radar survey and the brilliant results from that. But I will be touching on those as well, because you can't really, as with all research, you can't really discuss results kind of in isolation. You've got to take all the information available to you. So Neil's report's already available to download from the Historic England website. That's free as a PDF if you are so interested. And there will then be another report which will hopefully come out in the summer, which will combine the results of Neil's ground penetrating radar survey with all the other research we've done as part of the project. Down. Yes. Okay. So in terms of the aims of the research, what we were trying to do was to see if we could build on the story of the Priory using some new techniques. One of the aims was to try and enhance the National Heritage List for England record for the Priory, which is what we call an old county number, so it's a record with very little information in it at the moment. So we want to provide information that can help with the future management of the area of Prairie Gardens. And really, perhaps key to it is we wanted to really embed the important history of the Priory and this amazing site that you have right in the heart of the town. We wanted to embed that within the heart of the High Street Heritage Action Zone, and really felt that you couldn't really think about High Street South without thinking about the Priory and how important it is and what influence it's had on the development of the town. Okay, well we've already seen Jean's talk, amazingly delivered by Stephen. You know, there's been decades of previous research in Dunstable, so we're not really coming along and sweeping that away. What we're doing is building on it, and there's been such important work, multiple small-scale excavations in and around Prairie Gardens, many of which were undertaken by the Manshead Archaeological Society. And there's also been a wealth of documentary research, much of it done by the Medieval Dunstable group that Stephen's already talked about. This includes, in particular, probably most relevant to what I'm going to talk about today is the geophysical survey, the resistivity surveys, two of which were carried out by the Manshead Archaeological Society, the one here shown from 2004-2005. So all the research and the report that we eventually publish will be really drawing on all those foundations that already exist. Okay, so what have we done so far? The ground penetrating radar survey is complete, and as I said, the report is available on the Historic England website. We've completed our analytical earthworks survey. A colleague, Martin Barber, has done an assessment of the historic aerial photographs, and Matt has had his fancy drone out in the gardens, I think about 2 weeks ago, and has made a digital elevation model, so a 3D model of the gardens, the surface of the gardens, using a drone. So all those pieces of work have been undertaken, but I want to really stress at this point that our thoughts here are very much interim, and there's going to be there's still some thinking to be done and some synthesis to be done, really. So this is just where we've got to so far, and we're very much in the head scratching and reading round and looking at other examples of sites at that stage, really. Okay, so I wanted to start by just talking about the aerial photographs, because I thought some of you might be interested in seeing some of the photos of the Prairie Gardens. looking at historic aerial photographs is really useful, particularly in an urban context, because it's really giving us a really great insight into 20th century landscape change. And certainly the approach that we take when we're doing our research is that, although of course, you know, the medieval prairie is the big story, I wouldn't ever argue with that, but we tend to take a holistic approach and look at all aspects of change within the landscape, and the aerial photographs are very good for looking at very recent change. So I wanted to point out that there's two new websites. There's the Aerial Photo Explorer and the Aerial Archaeology Mapping Explorer. These can both be accessed through Historic England's website and give you access to not only, I think there's 400,000 digital photographs across England, but also mapping, archaeological mapping from those photographs. But the photos I wanted to concentrate on are aerofilms photos, and these can be seen on the Britain from Above website. So as I said, that these are really useful photographs for looking at landscape change. In the context of the work we've done in Prairie Gardens, they're a really great source of information about what's gone on in the 20th century. So this is the croquet lawn as we know it now, and we can see that where the formal gardens are today, there was what we think is vegetable garden, and then down here was an orchard. And it's really useful for explaining some of the evidence that we find when we're looking at the surface evidence in the gardens today. So you can actually see very subtle lumps and bumps around where this fountain was located, and many of these tree holes are actually visible if you are so interested in going hunting for them. I particularly wanted Martin, my colleague, to look at what might have happened in the playing fields. I'm sure Neil may come back to this in terms of the ground penetrating radar survey. But I wanted to find out about what might have affected the visibility of the archaeology in that particular area. So this is the area south of Prairie Gardens, where really our understanding of what's happening in terms of the prairie layout kind of, we don't have a great understanding. There's not much information. Okay. So this one, some of you that were on the tours this morning, I mentioned 1938 photographs. And as I was saying, what we look at when we look at the geophysical surveys or the earthworks surveys it's what we call a palimpsest. It's a kind of a picture that takes in features from lots of different periods. And one of the quite clear features that runs through the gardens is this service pipe trench that you can see going in on these photographs. And on this one, I don't know how clear it is from at the back, but there's these huge circular section pipes that were going in as part of this change. So not as important or as interesting as the priory, but you know, maybe the archaeology of the future and something that we need to sort of understand to disentangle it from the more important features. Okay, so this is possibly more interesting. So this is March 1949 and shows the area at the east end of the Priory Church, and it's fenced off. I think there's a fence along here, and you can see some disturbance in this area here and something going on down here. Now we know that there were excavations in 1948, and this was the point at which they found, I think they found a column base in the crossing, and they found some walling. And I've read about that in terms of secondary sources, but I'd be really interested to know if anybody knows where there's any primary sources, like original excavation information about this, because what intrigues me is the way it's described in the secondary sources. It sounds like a really small intervention, but actually there's a heck of a lot of spoil disturbance going on around here. So were the excavations bigger than we understood, or is something else going on? We don't really know, but if anybody knows, I'd be interested to hear from you. Okay, so moving on. So what did we do? So my particular specialist area is in Earthworks Survey and Landscape Survey. So this is using observation to look at the surface features that you can see on the ground and in the landscape and interpreting those. So it's really careful observation. And the benefit of doing it in the Prairie Gardens was that even though there's the geophysical, the resistivity survey existed and there's lots of documentary information, the actual lumps and bumps, the surface evidence in Prairie Gardens has never actually been recorded before. So it's an opportunity to make a really accurate plan of what we see in the gardens. So we used 2 different types of technology. GNSS satellite technology, and that's used to fix the survey in the right place on the map, on the right place on the Ordnance Survey map. And the beady-eyed of you will notice that this is a GNSS kit, but it's not dunstable. There's some old stones in the background there that you might recognise. And then most of the detail of what we drew was recorded with a total station theodolite. So this is Matt here, looking confused, should we say?
That was the first bit of survey after a year and a half of lockdown, so there may have been a problem.
So we used total station, the theodolite survey, because particularly in Prairie Gardens, there's just a bit too much tree cover for the satellite survey equipment to work consistently, and it doesn't work very well when you get up close against buildings and things. So how does Earthworks Survey work? So it's all about looking at relationships and patterns between different features on the ground. So this is a genuine little bit of survey from Dunstable. So what we do is we record the tops and bottoms of slopes using the total station. Then we use hashes, so the triangles with little tails, and they can be used to show the strength and the direction of slope. And then eventually we build up a plan. I've lost myself, hang on. So it's very careful observation to build up a plan. So this is the interim survey plan of Prairie Gardens. It needs a little bit of tickling here and there. I think the key thing that I'd want everyone to take away from it is that there are clear, coherent earthworks that can be picked out of all these features. So the lumps and bumps out there, they're not all demolition rubble. You don't tend to demolish things in straight lines. And what's really important is there are features out there that are parts of the medieval prairie layout that are visible on the ground without a map, without a plan for everyone to see. I suppose the way we could characterise it is, some of it was hiding in plain sight. Some of the features relate directly to buildings that we can see on the resistivity and on the ground penetrating radar, but some don't. And as I said, some of the features record evidence of more recent landscape change. Okay, I don't want to steal any thunder from Neil's bit of the talk, but some of the prairie buildings that we know from the geophysical survey are visible on the surface despite all the probable demolition rubble. So the Earthworks Survey recorded a curving bank here, turning into a scarp here, which actually sits almost exactly over the feature on the east end of the church that's shown from the ground penetrating radar. I think it's, and Neil will talk more about this in his part of the talk, I think it's fair to say that I'm not 100% sure whether we would have got from this to this had we not seen the ground penetrating radar survey, so I'll be honest about that. But like I said, some of you that came on the tours this morning, I walked around the curve of it, we were stood on it, it's there, and it'll be great to see that incorporated into, the interpretation that's marked out in the Prairie Gardens over the summer months. Interestingly, I don't know how clearly you can, let me just flick forward, did I put another one in? Yeah. So Matt did the ground model drone survey from the drone, and what that does is I think Matt said it used about 600 aerial photographs taken from the drone to build up this ground model. And it's really interesting because actually the rounded feature here that Neil's going to talk more about shows really more clearly on the model, maybe because you've stepped back and you can see that view more clearly than it did on the ground. And what you can do using the computer programmers, you can light the model from every direction, which draws out the earthworks much more clearly. But some areas are really confused, so it's a case of using all the different tools and information you've got at your disposal and bringing all that together. Okay, so I think we can see the curve on the ground model here. There are a few other examples of features relating to what we know are buried parts of the Prairie buildings that can be seen on the ground. These include the corner here, which matches this corner here, which is maybe, I think what Stephen described in his talk as the smaller court, this one here. So that you can see that on the surface really clearly. Maybe a second cloister, a second smaller garden area, a cloister here. Probably another feature that's worth looking at is this little hollow here, which I have to say we didn't think much of. We weren't particularly excited by it. We thought it might have been where a tree had come out or something, but it actually matches exactly over the anomaly here that Neil and Andy recorded when they did the GPR survey. So again, I don't know, I was wondering whether this might be a well, Neil, but you might want to dismiss that with your GPR hat on. But anyway, again, an example of different features like this range of buildings here actually being visible as earthworks, scarps, slopes, ditches and banks within the on the surface. Okay. So in some areas, the surface evidence is different from what we can see on the geophysical surveys and really adds extra information. Particularly here in the southeast corner, so those of you who know the site really well, there's a mound that sits on the boundary between the gardens and Prairie Middle School playing fields. And this very, very, very subtle bank and ditch here sits on quite a different alignment. It's not on line with this feature, it's on quite a different alignment, which suggests we've got things going on that we can't necessarily see in the geophysical surveys either. Maybe this is it could potentially be a later boundary or a different phase even. Let me just go forwards a bit. What is interesting in this area is a feature that doesn't show amazingly well on the GPR, but this square feature on the resistivity, so this is the Manshead's resistivity survey, it sits in this corner of this curving, might have been some boundary here. So there is extra little bits of information to help build up the picture. Okay, so in the western area of the site, neither the resistivity or the GPR really, again, gives us much extra information about what's going on in this area. But it obviously was quite an important part of the sort of outer precinct of the Priory, as I believe the bakehouse that was discovered in the rear of the Saracen's Head is in there somewhere. So we're not that far away from that structure that was excavated by the Menster Archaeological Society. So although there is not a great deal of information in the kind of geophysics, we have got two features here and here, which might imply that there may be building platforms. Obviously we don't know, we can't date just from looking at a sort of rectangular platform what date it might be. But if it does fit with part of the medieval landscape, then the reason that it's nothing shown on the resistivity or GPR survey, maybe because the buildings here were more ephemeral, were not stone constructions. It's possible. These earthworks, however, these scarps up here, relate to a late 19th century building that survived until at least the 1960s. So again, it's a real mixture of features that have been created at different days. Okay, so as I was saying before, to the modern activities, this feature shows really clearly on, can you see it? There's a little bit of it here showing as an earthwork, and it runs right up here, and this is this service trench we think that we see on the 1938 photographs. But there's also another feature here, which is, I can't really see from this angle, but does show reasonably well on the I think it's there, but I'm a bit of a funny angle, so I can't quite see. Does show on the, and we don't have any explanation for that. It doesn't show particularly well on either form of geophysical survey. So it's probably a modern. It doesn't fit very well into the monastic layout, so it probably is another modern feature, but we don't really have an explanation for that one. So, to some wider questions which we're still thinking about. One of the interesting things that we've seen, which I think isn't really it's sort of hinted at in the Manshead resistivity survey, but isn't as clear, is that I think we've got a change in alignment towards the south side of the site as we get away from the church, and I think that was shown on a lot of the plans that Matt showed, that this change in alignment here. So these two buildings appear to be on a slightly different angle. Now we don't know why that is, whether that's, whether that was because of some sort of constraint of the shape of this inner precinct area. Is it something to do with there's a very sort of quite a large slope that comes down through the site here. Was that constraining the layout in some way? Is it something to do with the water management? I mean, something that we've been discussing in the morning on the tours was, how did they manage with all these wells everywhere, but no obvious source of running water? We're really not sure yet. The jury's out, and we're willing to sort of hear people's ideas. Okay, so this is this is just showing this scarp that runs through that may have had some influence on the layout of the buildings as you get to this southern area of the site. Okay, so not that one. We'd also quite like to untangle a little bit more about the 1540s plan. I don't know how many of you have seen this before. I think it has been published before in one of the books about Dunstable. I can't quite recall which one now. So it's a proposal for conversion of the Prairie buildings by Henry VIII's surveyor, and we're intrigued to sort of think about how it fits and how much it reflects and relates to what we see on the ground. It's quite interesting when you spin it through 90 degrees, and broadly speaking, it fits with the layout we can see on the geophysics. So you've got the cloister in here. You can see this range really clearly. You can possibly see this other area in here. this range of buildings down here. So we're kind of interested in this, but this looks like it's a first floor plan, and obviously all the evidence we're seeing on ground is foundation level. So one of the things we want to untangle and think about further is to what extent does it, reflect what we're seeing on the ground. Is that, did any of the conversions start, because it was abandoned, did any of the work actually happen? Or is this plan really a really good plan of essentially what the Prairie buildings were like at dissolution? And this is just another this is a GPR survey, and sort of looking again at how it fits. So you've got this range of buildings here, this area. I mean, I don't know, possibly. Okay. And then one of the things, I think one thing we haven't moved forward with very much at the moment is how exactly Prairie House fits into the pattern of the wider landscape of the Prairie, and then that's ongoing really, the thinking about that. And this is just a tithe map, and we're thinking about what Matt was talking about, the Forbury, the area in front of the Prairie where the market might have been held, and I think can certainly imagine how this area might have been used based on Matt's talk. Yeah, so further thinking to be done. Further thinking about the water supply. If we accept that it was all from wells, then how exactly did that work? And Matt and I are kind of keen on finding some examples of similar foundations that managed purely on well-drawn water. Where exactly were the boundaries of the outer and inner courts or precincts? We want to think a bit more about that, particularly in how Prairie House relates. And where was the southern boundary? We can see on the GPR and on the resistivity that it looks like we have building ranges that are truncated by the southern boundary. Have we lost lots of information in Prairie Middle School playing fields, or was it never there? So it's a case of watch this space, really. And that's me, so. Okay.